Our guy is here now, David Helman, NFL on Fox podcast, and a good afternoon to you. We're live from Whataburger, Dave, so we win. How the heck are you, though?
Oh, my God, I haven't had Whataburger in so long. That made me so sad, Gavin.
Sorry. I'll have a honey butter nugget for you or something. We'll be thinking about you. Maybe
get them to make me the A1 thick and hearty burger. Ooh. I need one of those in my life.
Yes, and the Cowboys need a winning team in their life, of course, Dave. How much are you thinking this downturn could be beyond this year, multiple seasons, or do you think they'll pull out of this and have a correction either at some point this year or next year at the latest?
I'm willing to say I don't see a big upturn coming this year. I mean, maybe the Cowboys can do a couple things to, improve this year's team, improve the run defense, find a way to scheme up some open receivers for a change. I don't see it going great for the rest of the season. I'm not ready to speculate on a multi-year turn. I mean, they're going to have cap space next year. They're going to have draft assets. It doesn't look like it right now, but they are typically pretty good in the draft at finding, blue chip caliber players. So I'm not worried about the big picture, but it's looking pretty bleak in 2024.
What'd you think about Micah asked Trevon Diggs on the podcast and them kind of going back and forth thinking the media needs to protect them. We're supposed to be one. We're supposed to be together. I wonder your perspective of that, having worked at DallasCowboys.com, actually being the team's media, and now you're a national representative.
Well, and I'm sure Brian has talked about this plenty of times. I think DallasCowboys.com is pretty unique among not just NFL teams, but really all team-owned media in the sense that we just had a lot more leeway to be critical and be honest. So I really – and I completely understand. We were still owned by the team. We still ultimately answered to the Jones family at the end of the day. But you compare – the work that we did with pretty much any other team-owned media, and I think it's a vastly different experience. But I will say, I think it's a confusing time to digest media if you're not trained in the world of media. I saw Micah and Trevon say that, and for all of the traditional old school outlets that do this and have done it for a long time, these days there are just as many podcasts, blogs, newsletters, whatever you want to call it, from people who are fans and who are unabashedly pro-Cowboys. So I just think there's so much noise. There's more noise than there's ever been, and it's coming from all different directions. And I'm not even saying that to disparage anybody, because I think a lot of new media do really good work, but it's harder than it's ever been to parse through all of that. But, as we know, that's not traditionally the job of media. But I don't really blame Micah and Trevon for having an incorrect view of it, I guess.
Did something change? What changed? Are the Cowboys more sensitive, this disappointing season as compared to some of those that you covered closely?
In my opinion, it always gets like this with the players when the team is bad. Things are more critical. There's no, the fun angles are not as interesting when the team struggles. Players take things personally. I can think back to every year, 2020, 2017, or 2019, 2015, 2013. And the team is bad or even mediocre, this type of stuff happens where the media piles on the team lashes out in response. What I do think is different is typically the ownership and head coaching structure kind of stays out of it, in my opinion, where the higher up the chain of command you go, the more that people understand that this all goes with the territory. This is part of the dinner, to quote Jason Garrett. But this year, obviously, we know on y'all's station, Jerry Jones has been a big part of the news cycle this year where he's kind of lashing out about criticisms on the team. You've seen Mike McCarthy get outwardly prickly during press conferences about questions that are being asked. I think that's very unusual, and I think it speaks to the tensions this year where Mike McCarthy knows he's in the last year of his deal, and maybe maybe Jerry and Stephen Jones didn't expect their team to be this middling. But I think that's the big difference for me. I'm never surprised when players get angry about negative coverage, but it's a little more unusual to see it from Jerry and Mike.
Dave, something that stood out to me while I was doing the podcast with Brian, I was going back and looking at, all right, the Cowboys' salary cap structure and their second contracts. Have they done a poor job of assessing the players to pay for a second contract and not get the return on that investment?
I think that's a great question, man. And I think it's fair to point out that they haven't had wonderful luck with some of those second contracts that they've handed out. Terrence Steele comes to mind right off the top of my head. But even going back a few years, the Lyle Collins and Jalen Smith contracts looked like steals at the time. But if the player doesn't continue to ascend, then it no longer looks like a steal. So that's a really good question. I hate to dogpile on them for that because we do complain when the Cowboys aren't proactive, right? Like they wait and they wait and they wait. And that can bite them in the ass because then the contracts get too expensive. But they have been proactive in a few cases where they're like, hey, we can save a few dollars if we get this guy done a year ahead of time. And if the player is willing to play ball, that's how you can save money against the cap. So, like I said, I hate to kill them for doing that in a few circumstances, but I do agree with you. It just seems like they've had tough luck identifying those contracts the last few years.
Dave, I kind of felt like this offensive line would have a chance this year. I felt like that maybe the two rookies, and they're not rookies anymore now. They've played 8 weeks in the National Football League, so they're kind of they understand what this is all about. I just felt like I misevaluated that group. Is there, when you look at this football team, is there a group that you felt like that maybe you misevaluated or that is playing better than you thought they would play?
To be honest with you, not really. I hate to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, but a lot of the problems that I had with the Cowboys roster heading into the season have come to fruition. Personally, ironically, Tyron Smith is not having a great year in New York anyway, but
no.
I was very dubious that you would be able to replace two starters on the offensive line without it being a problem. I was very worried about the receiver depth and the running back room. I was very worried about the number of defensive linemen that walked out the door where they didn't seem to have a good replacement for it. I guess, honestly, and you guys know how I feel about Dak Prescott, so hopefully It doesn't sound like I'm dogpiling the guy. But when I looked at the Cowboys over the summer, I was like, man, this is a middling roster, but they have a good enough quarterback that he's going to be able to make up for it. And Dak hasn't played that way this year. So I think that's probably my biggest surprise is before the season, I was like, this is a mediocre team, but Dak can get them to 9-8 because he's that good. But he hasn't been that good this year. There's still time for him to pull out of it. Obviously, I think a big reason for that is he doesn't have a whole lot of help on the offensive side of the ball. But when you make that kind of salary, nobody wants to hear that stuff. So I do think there are ways he can raise his play even without a better supporting cast, and that is probably your best hope to try to, pull this season together and get it to a better place.
Dave, if I was a Cowboy fan, just say, or I was my hope is that I've always felt like that Dak through the years has always been compared to Stafford. When they asked the quarterbacks, the top quarterbacks, right? He was always kind of lumped in that group with Stafford, and Goff and Eli Manning. That he was always in that kind of group. And I've kind of seen those guys go with good play callers or guys that can kind of help. And those quarterbacks look like they've elevated themselves a little bit. As a Cowboy fan, is your hope that they get somebody in there that could be a primary play caller, head coach, that could pull him out of what kind of funk he's in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be a dream come true. Yeah, I actually, shameless plug, I talk to Greg Olson for our NFL on Fox podcast every week, and he has this Cowboys-Falcons game this weekend, and he was talking about a lot of the same stuff that y'all talk about on the local level and anybody who watches the Cowboys talks about, which is everything for this offense looks so hard. Like there are no layups for this group. There's nothing,
right.
There's no easy button. There's nothing that they can fall back on that doesn't require everybody being perfect to be successful. And, you're just not going to have that many snaps in the NFL where everybody's perfect. So, yeah, I mean, if I'm looking for optimism in the big picture, then, yeah, like having that sort of play caller, well, your Kyle Shanahan, your Sean McVay. I think Ben Johnson is the name that's going to get thrown around until he finally takes a head coaching job. You see the difference that those guys can make for their teams. And I mean, I'm very confident that you could design this offense to put Dak in a better situation, even with this level of talent. I mean, the drop off from last year's offense was definitely better, but the drop off from what they had last year to what they have now is not so severe that they should look this bad. I don't believe that. And so, yeah, when you're in a situation like that, you think, better play design, better play calling, a better schemed offense, I think isn't going to turn them into a juggernaut. Not this team anyway, but I do think it could make a difference. And if they do wind up making a coaching change, that is what I would fixate on, knowing that you've already committed to Dak for the foreseeable future.
David Helman, NFL on Fox, thank you so much for your time and enjoy Week 9.
Anytime, fellas. Appreciate it.